Howdy, folks. I'm Hank Sheffer, and welcome to another true life adventure right here with Marshall Trimble on Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.
All right, Larcena Pennington, the ordeal, the ordeal of Larcena Pennington. Let's start out with the Arizona situation in Arizona during the time the Penningtons were here. The Civil War, when the Civil War broke out, the Army abandoned all of the military posts here in Arizona, just took what they could and set them on fire. And this was interpreted by the Apache. They knew there was something going on back east, something big going on back east, but they really interpreted it as now it's our place again, and they didn't have the soldiers to worry about. They roamed and looted and pillaged at will, and so it's pretty dangerous. In fact, the safest place to be was Tucson, behind the walls, and people outside of Tucson either moved back to Sonora or California and just got out of here. It was just really a no man's land for several years till the Army came back. And the Penningtons, though, a little bit before that, Eli Pennington was an interesting guy. He was from Tennessee and then to Louisiana and Texas, and he moved to Texas about in the 1830s and settled in East Texas. But he was a wayfaring, he was a wandering soul, and he thought Texas was getting too crowded. So he decided to, and his family was growing. He now had 12 kids, 8 girls and 4 boys. And he decided to go out and check out the Brazos River country. So he goes out there and he sees some good country around the Brazos. So he comes back to East Texas, and his wife Julia has passed away. So now he's a single father, and he's got his huge family, and he decides, let's get a fresh start in California. So they're going to go to California. So they load him up, all 12 kids and him, and join a wagon train, and they head across Texas, across New Mexico. They come into Arizona on the old Butterfield Overland Stagecoach Road. This is 1857, and they cross it to Doubtful Canyon, come down through Apache Pass, Dragoon Springs, Benson, cross the San Pedro River there, and then he turns south and go over down to Fort Buchanan, which is down on Sonoyta Creek, and it's beautiful country. It's one of the prettiest range countries in Arizona. When they filmed the movie Oklahoma, they thought this looks like Oklahoma, and it is just beautiful grass, good grass, and there was only one problem. You ought to watch out for these roaming Apache bands because they cut no quarter, and but he decides he wants to stay there, so he starts a ranch along Sonoyta Creek, and Larcena is his oldest daughter, and she's 20 now. And very pretty, and she's all the soldiers at the fort are just crazy about her. But she takes a liking to one guy, a fellow named John Page, big, strapping, handsome guy. But he was a hellion, and he'd come in with a notorious gunfighter from Texas, Jeff Ake, in 1857 also. And he's in Tucson. Well, they fall in love, and they get married. On Christmas Eve of 1859, and we believe it's the first all-American wedding in the old Pueblo. And he takes a job working for Bill Kirkland, who's another pioneer Arizonan, and Kirkland's got a lumber mill and a ranch down on Canoa, and that's just south of Tucson, a few miles on the way to Nogales, and he takes Larcena to tutor his. He has a ward child. This girl is let's see, she's 8 years old, 8-year-old Mercedes Quiroz, and her mother is a widow. And Kirkland just took a liking to the kid, and he's going to have her learn English. And so Larcena's down at Canoa, doing that. And her husband John has gone up into the Santa Rita Mountains where Kirkland has a lumber camp. So anyway, she's not in good health, and she decides the mountain air up in the Santa Ritas will be more healthy for her. So she takes Mercedes and they load up in an ox cart, and they go up Madera Canyon. They don't know it, but they're being watched by a band of just 5 Apache who have just wandered in from clear up north of the Gila River. These are Tonto Apache, and they're watching. And they see them come into, they make a camp, they move into a tent, and the next morning, her husband's gone up to the pinery where they're cutting timber, and the other man that came with him, his friend was Randall, and he's out hunting deer, and so she's just alone in the camp with the tent there with little Mercedes. Well, she's got her dog. She's curled up on a bed resting, and Mercedes is outside playing. And all of a sudden, the dog starts growling, and she hears Mercedes scream, and so she reaches under the bed covers for a pistol. But about that time, the tent flap opens, and in comes this older Apache, big fella, and knocks the gun out of her hand, and takes and pulls her outside, and there she sees 4 other Apache, and they've got Mercedes, little Mercedes, and so while they're holding them down, they just pillage the place. They cut open bags of flour and scatter them on the ground, just regular trash, just trash the camp. They're real young. She said they were just kids except for the one man who was older, and we believe he is was the chief of the Aravaipa tribe up at Aravaipa Canyon, a fellow by the name of Escaminson, and is kind of a scoundrel anyway. But they do the damage that they want to, and take the stuff they want, and they head out. They go up in a northeasterly direction out of the Madera Canyon, and but she is a veteran frontier woman. Larcena is, and she's now 22, but she knows what to do. She starts tearing off pieces of her dress and leaving them along the trail, and breaking twigs, and they're so occupied with getting away, they don't even notice that she's leaving a trail for her husband to follow, and but off they go, and meanwhile Randall comes back into the camp. He sees it's just been plain torn up, and so he rushes back down to Kanoa, and they get word down to Fort Buchanan where the 1st United States Dragoons are stationed. And they send a party out. Her husband is going to organize a rescue party to go after them, and so they're picking up the trail, and they follow the trail. Well, they get way up on a high ridge, and along the way, they have a rear guard watching to see if they're being pursued, and they get up on a high ridge, and little Mercedes hear them speaking Spanish. She spoke Spanish, and she hears them speaking that they're going to kill Larcena, and so they get up on the ridge. They make Larcena take off her dress, and she's wearing just now a chemise and petticoat, and then they take her shoes, and then they prod her up towards the edge of the canyon, of the cliff, and they jab her with a spear, lance, and then they push her off, and she goes tumbling down the hill, and they're throwing rocks at her at the same time, and so she lands at the bottom, and she hits a tree, and she's kind of dazed by it all. Then one of them comes up and takes a rock and smashes her head. When she comes to, they're all gone, and then she hears but she's badly injured. She hears the search party come, and she hears her dog barking, and the dog knows she's down there, but it's almost twilight, and so her husband nobody can see, and she is unable to speak because she's so badly beaten, and so she can't call for help, and then they see footprints, shoe prints, and these Apache had been wearing high-rising moccasins, and so so they figure there's Larcena's tracks. We follow her shoe. One of them was wearing her shoes, and that's what throws them. And so they go on, and she's now going to have to make it on her own somehow. So, but for about 3 days, she just lies there waiting to recover, taking melted snow and whatever else she can find, grass or whatever she can find on the ground to eat. And she's battered pretty badly, so she decides she looks off to the distance there towards Madera Canyon. She realizes she'd gone about 12 miles. That's going to be her mark to go to work for. She can't walk. She's too badly beaten to walk, so she has to crawl on her hands and knees, and that's the only way she can travel. But she knows she keeps that huerfano in view, and she goes along, and she's doing the best she can, eating taking melted snow for water, whatever else, what berries or whatever she could find along the way to eat and subsist on. And finally she finds a place to bed down, and she realizes she's in a bear's den. So she figures better get out of here. So she crawls away. She keeps crawling, ever crawling towards Huerfano Butte. And she finally gets there and gets to the edge of the canyon, the ridge that looks down on the road to Madera Canyon. And she sees an ox cart down there, but she can't yell. So she takes part of her clothes and waves them, makes a flag and waves, and they don't see her. So she's still got a ways to go. And it's been 2 weeks now. She's been out there 2 weeks. And so she crawls down, and she gets down to the road and then crawls up to where the lumber camp was, and there's nobody there. And so she does see the ruins of where, what was left. She finds some of the flour that they scattered on the ground when they cut up on the flour sacks, and she goes, takes them over to the creek, and she soaks it and builds a little fire, and she's able to make herself a little bread to eat, and she has some water from the creek, and the next morning she goes to sleep. Next morning she hears voices off in the distance, and it's the lumber camp, and so she crawls and crawls over there, and when she gets, there's a man named Hampton, is a black man from Texas, and he's the cook, and he hears a sound, and he looks over there, and at first he thinks it's an apparition. He thinks it's somebody who's come back from the dead. He's really kind of spooked about it, and he gets closer, and she says, "I'm Larcena Pennington," or Larcena Page. She's now Larcena Page. She says, "I'm Larcena Page." So he picks her up, and he carries her in. They didn't even recognize her. She had changed. She was so emaciated and blistered. Her shoulders had been bare and blistered from the sun. And the nights were freezing cold, and the days were blazing hot while she was crawling all that way. Must like to say about 12 miles. And they took her into the camp, and they didn't think she was going to make it. But somebody rushes into Kanoa and lets Kirkland know that Mrs. Page has been found and alive, and her husband's out getting ready to go on another search. He never gave up. The Apache grapevine said that she was dead, that she'd been killed, but he refused to believe it. And this is a great love story that you would think would go on, and or would hope it would. But he comes back, and they bring a doctor out, and the doctor thinks she's not going to make it, but he believes she can, and he knows his wife, and so he puts her in a wagon, ox cart, and takes her to Tucson, where she gets medical care, and she pretty soon she's back to normal again. well, what about little Mercedes? Well, the Apaches kept Mercedes for a while, and the commander at Fort Buchanan now is determined to get her back, and so he starts out. You know, there are connections with Indian tribes around there. Like we want, kind of like, if you remember from the Searchers, there are people who give you information, and so Mercedes is believed to be up around Aravipa Canyon, and so he starts negotiating with this Escamenson. Escamenson denies that he was the person that kidnapped her, but he maybe can arrange to have little Mercedes ransomed, and it just happens that the Army has 20 captives from a battle over in the Dragoon Mountains, Pinal Apaches, and maybe you can give us one little girl for 20 captives. And the major knew it was a Major Steen. It was a unequal trade, but he wants the girl. To get the girl back, the little girl back. So they give him the captives back, return the captives, and they return the little girl, and Kirkland gives him a horse to take her back to Tucson, and so she's returned to Tucson, and they ring the bells at St. Augustine, and the whole town is celebrating the return of this little girl, and so she's back with her mother, and her mother's just beside herself with, and fast forward now a few years, Mercedes grows up to be a beautiful young woman, and she marries a man named Charlie Scheibel. Charlie Scheibel is later sheriff of Pima County, and he, in fact, when Wyatt Earp and the OK Corral and all this Cochise County War was going on, Charlie Scheibel was the sheriff at that time. So, but anyway, this was unfortunately while giving birth to her fourth child, little Mercedes, now 26 years old, passes away. That was in 1875. So she did not live to see her husband become sheriff of Pima County. But anyway, that was Mercedes' story, and Larcena. Things didn't go too well for the Penningtons and the Pages. 2 years later, John Page is ambushed up by Canyon de Oro, and he's ambushed and killed, and they buried him on the spot. She never got to see the body or say goodbye, and so now Larcena's a single woman again, and she would soon give birth to a baby, and she went back with her family. They were down on the Santa Cruz River, and with her dad, and they're moving about because of the Apache is still, it's the early 1860s, and the Apaches rule all up and down the Santa Cruz Valley, and so they're moving a lot, and he has to be away a lot, and when he's away, it's up to the girls to fight them off with guns. These girls, you can see these girls, four sisters, taking them on. Well, then another sister dies of the mountain fever or the malaria, and then two boys die in Apache attacks. Two of her brothers died in Apache attacks, and then her father, Eli, is killed in an Apache attack. So now there are five of them have now died either with malaria or Apache attacks. And so a brother from Texas comes out and he rounds up his sisters. He's going to herd them all back to Texas. He said, this place is too dangerous. And it was. My gosh, it wasn't until the 1870s, well into the 1870s, that it was really safe. And but Larcena won't go. She's staying in Tucson. She's going to stay here now. This is where she wants to be. So she 2 years later, she marries again, has 4 children. She's now in her 30s, and she has a productive life there in Tucson, and lives until 1913. Died at, I believe it was 76. So she's an amazing story of survival, and an amazing story of a woman just with a will to live, and what she overcame. But the other tragedy is all her family. You know, her dad, and her brothers and her sisters, and so. But anyway, she's the remaining Pennington. But if you go to Tucson today, there's a big main street there called Pennington, and it's named for the family.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.